God bless you. This is Pastor Witt. I just want to stop by and share with you what's on my heart today. The words in my heart are get free. I keep hearing that, get free. Let's start with a little history. Start with a little history here. In 1865, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves from slavery, from chattel slavery. They were no longer property. They were people. Okay. And that in itself was good, obviously. But the problem was that there were no mechanisms in place for freed Africans to be free from slavery. They had no education for the most part. They did not understand how the system operated. They had no ownership of any lands. Everything that they had was given to them. They didn't actually own anything. So they were pretty much expected to just be free without knowing how to be free. So because what they didn't know how to do was be slaves, they continued to operate as slaves, even though they were told to be free. Now, let's understand some background before I even get into all of what I just said. And what I just said was a mouthful, and there are plenty of things in there to talk about. And this is probably going to wind up being a series, but the first part of this that I want to look at is Abraham Lincoln's dilemma. This is actually a moment in history where opposing forces are wrestling for the very soul of America. What kind of nation is America going to be? Is it going to be controlled by monetary interests, or is it going to be controlled by moral standards? How will this country operate? And so we have the one side arguing against slavery. We have the other side arguing for slavery, to the point that the country became divided. Many states, slave states, seceded from the Union and became their own nation, the Confederacy. And then the rest of the states remained the Union. The war was not going very well for the North. Okay. And the issue was whether the state would remain its own country or would be re-annexed to the United States as a whole, and things continue as they did before with one nation, except that slavery would be abolished. There was an outside force watching everything. That force was Great Britain. And Great Britain was making money hand over fist dealing with the South. So it was advantageous to Great Britain to maintain relations with the South as they were, because the textile mills in Great Britain got all of their cotton from the slave plantations in the South. So they were operating in a relationship that was favorable to Great Britain in the first place, because Great Britain still considered America a colony. And that's another whole story. Okay. But what is crucial at this moment is that because there was already a war fought between America and Great Britain for the freedom to be its own, for America's freedom to be its own country, Great Britain says, well, this is no different than what happened between us and America. If the South wants to be its own country and we have business relations with the South, it's advantageous to us to help the South to defeat the North and remain its own country. So as Great Britain prepared to enter the war, Abraham Lincoln caught wind of this, and that's where the Emancipation Proclamation came from. If it was just a matter of the United States being divided over the issue of slavery, then Great Britain, who had already freed their slaves and had already come to the place where they recognized the moral ineptitude of slaving other human beings, they would have stayed out of it because that was a moral issue that the country had to come to. But if it was just a matter of the South wanting to be separate from the North, then it would be the same as when the French came in to assist America in being free. Great Britain would simply say, we are allied with the South. We are going to enter the war on behalf of the South, and we're going to defeat the North in order to protect our business interests with the South. Because if the North wins, then slavery will be abolished, and slavery is how the South is operating. So are we talking about a moral issue, or are we talking about a financial issue? If it's a moral issue, we'll stay out of it. If it's a financial issue, if it's a matter of wanting to be a separate nation, if that's all it is, then we're going to get in it on the side of the South. So Abraham Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation in order to keep Great Britain out of the war. And as a result, obviously, through history, we understand that the North won. Now, I'm focusing on Abraham Lincoln because we didn't get to the point where an absolute declaration about the issue of slavery was made until he was forced to have to deal with that issue, not from a political keeping the nation together, but from the actual moral ramifications of holding human beings as slaves, as property. Okay. And that's where we have to come. If we're going to get free, there can be no war going on in between the left and the right side of our spirit. There can be no indecision. There can be no going back and forth. There has to be a clear-cut decision, a decision about what is and is not going to be in our lives. We have to make a clear decision. We have to have, in this case, when we're talking about freedom, if we come from a political position, if we talk about freedom as a people in this nation, we're never going to be free as long as we can't make up our minds of whether or not we want to really be free or be a slave. And as long as we're still depending on the system to give to us, to do for us what it has always given and always done, then we'll never be self-actuating to go and do for ourselves. And if we're not willing to go and do for ourselves, then we're also not willing to chart our own future. And that's really what freedom is all about. When we talk about the slaves that came out of Egypt, when we talk about Israel, the people who died in the wilderness were those who came out of Egypt, but Egypt never got out of them. They still had a slave mentality. They still wanted everything handed to them. They didn't want the responsibilities. They didn't want the chores, the duties that came with forming their own identity, their own national identity, their own heritage, their own laws, their own ways of doing business, their own standing army. Come on, all of these things that are necessary to build a nation, to have an identity in a world where every other nation has already been established in the land that you're going to infiltrate and take from these countries. But you're not willing to make those sacrifices. You keep talking about what you missed in Egypt. And that's the reason why they spent 40 years in the wilderness until an entire generation died, because only the free-minded people, only those who were willing to make the sacrifices to do what was necessary to become a nation could be useful in the development of a new nation. It's the same thing here in America. We keep saying that we want to be free, but we're not willing to do what it takes to be free. We still want people to give to us, to do for us. We don't want to go to school. We don't want, and this is not everybody. I'm just speaking in a generalized way. Okay. We obviously do have very successful professionals, but they're tied to the system. Okay. They're not thinking about being free because they're doing so well right where they are. So they don't have a reason to want to be free. And then those of us who are not doing so well, we're divided in certain categories. One of those categories, as I've already mentioned, is undereducation or no education. Okay. Criminal backgrounds, all kinds of things like that that hinder us from being able to command our destiny in this political system. Okay. And it's intentionally done like that. When freedom came to Americanized Africans, it was not at the complete abolition of slavery. Slavery was just transformed into something else. Okay, so we had the Emancipation Proclamation. After the Emancipation Proclamation, then we had the 13th Amendment. And the 13th Amendment said that slavery as an institution would no longer exist except as punishment for crimes that have been duly adjudicated. A person has been convicted of a crime. Now that person is going to be a slave. Okay? Then things that used to be freedoms became criminal acts because laws were created to limit these freedoms. And now there are things that should not be crimes, that traditionally, that historically were not crimes. They are crimes now. We are limited in what we can do. We are limited in the freedoms that we can enjoy because the objective is to create slaves by penalizing you with a jail sentence. Okay. This is really crucial information. I wish I had people watching right now. But anywho, this is the problem that we're facing. And we have to decide whether or not we're going to be free from this situation. Number one, what we have to do is decide that we're not going to be a part of the criminal element. We have to decide that we're no longer going to allow ourselves to be on the wrong side of the law. It's very popular to blame the police for what happens to us as a community. And I'm not saying that police should not be held accountable for what they do. What I am saying is that if we deliberately put ourselves in a position to fall under police jurisdiction, then we have no one to blame for that part of the equation but ourselves. Okay? And there are other parts of it. What kind of police officer is arresting us? What is his mentality? What is his method of operation within the carrying out or the discharge of his duties, etc.? I get all of that, but I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about us right now. I'm talking about what we can do as a people. And people feel like, no, you don't have to be a criminal to be accosted by the police. That's absolutely true. But when you purposely put yourself in a position because you purposely reject law and order, you purposely reject what the difference between right and wrong, and you do what's convenient for you, what matters to you at the expense of who you're supposed to be within a society, then we can't put that on the police. That's a decision we made. And regardless of what kind of police officer, regardless of whether or not they would have stopped us anyway, frisked us anyway, without provocation, without probable cause, I get that, but I don't care about that at this moment. What I care about is our decision to be free. That's what I care about at this moment. Are we making the kinds of decisions that lead us to freedom? Are we willing to pay the price to be free? Because the price is high. It's not easy to be free. It's very easy to go along with the machine. It's not easy to chart your own course, to create your own destiny, to be free. I want to talk about this some more, but I wanted to bring out this one issue with Abraham Lincoln because it illustrates a very clear point. Freedom begins with a decision. And until we make a clear-cut decision that slavery is wrong, and I don't care if we're talking about institutionalized slavery, I don't care if we're talking about slavery through the prison system, I don't care if we're talking about shackles on our minds. If we do not make a clear-cut decision that freedom is truth and that slavery is wrong, then we will continue to be slaves. So let's make a decision to be free. Let's start there, and we'll discuss this a little bit more tomorrow. All right. God bless you.